Hi, Year 11. This is a History Rounders Beeston Castle revision session. This will help you while studying at home in preparation for the exam. In this session, I'll go through with you all the content linked to Beeston Castle and exam tips and hints how to answer exam type questions. Firstly, just some key facts. The exam for this section is on the 16th of June at 9 o'clock. And in that exam, it's an hour exam like all your other exams. You get 3 questions in the exam. They will have the same marks. You get to choose 2 of those questions to answer. You don't do all 3, which means you have 30 minutes for each question. And like any exam, you should read the questions carefully first, underline the keywords in the question, think about what that question wants you to write about, and then choose the 2 questions you want to answer. And before you start writing any question, you make a little plan, some notes, keywords, key facts, key details you're going to include, and then you start your answer. To get the highest possible marks throughout your answers, you need to constantly link back to the question using connectives all the time to explain. And there are some examples on the screen. And for each of the 2 questions that you answer, you're looking for a minimum of 2 sides. In total, about 500 words. In terms of revision material, you've got this recorded session. On class charts, there will be revision material in this PowerPoint also. In terms of website, there's only one website that you need to use, and that's the English Heritage website. You can Google Beeston Castle, press search. The first hit will be the English Heritage website. That's the only place you need to go. The link will also be on class charts. If you are interested in looking on YouTube, you can get some very good footage from drone videos, see what the castle is like now. And then from class, you should have 2 booklets, one a little activity book and a source booklet. Both of them are on class charts too if you need them. But most of the material that you will need now will also be on this PowerPoint. So, Beeston Castle. We picked this site because it's local and it hasn't got a revising the facts about the castle. There's not much to know. 100 years old. It was built in 1220 by Ranulph, the Earl of Chester, and in its history, it's changed ownership several times, and the purpose and the use of that site has also changed a lot. So in a nutshell, what you really need to know about this castle and be able to answer and discuss confidently is about the key facts of the castle, the timeline of the castle, what it was used for and when, how the castle has physically changed over time, and how the castle's purpose and what it's been used for has changed, and the lives of people affected and impacted by the castle's history. If you can revise and confidently discuss those 4 key points, then you should have no problem with this exam. Now, history rounders, that means us choosing something local, a site, and discussing its historical importance. And what that basically means, and what the examiner wants you to think about, is a range of things linked to historical sites. Things like who built the site and why did he build it? How has the site changed over time? In this case, the castle. How has the site been used? History. When was the site significant and important in history? When was it at its peak? When was the castle, in this case, in good and important use? How has it changed over time physically? And does that make it easier or harder to study about its past? Is the site important locally or nationally? Can we compare this site to any other site? And what does that site tell us about people's lives in the past? Those thought bubbles are essentially what the examiner is thinking about when he's setting a question. A lot of the information that you will know about Beeston Castle or will revise about Beeston Castle covers lots of those questions. There's a lot of overlap. If you understand the castle's history, you'll be able to access and able to answer all the questions the examiner could possibly ask you. So what I've done initially, and you can come back over this at your leisure when you're revising, is I've given you the timeline of the castle's history. That, in a nutshell, that one slide is a summary of everything that happens in the castle's history, the main events. What I've done now is highlight certain things. So in red, I've highlighted the different owners of the castle. It's important you know who owned the castle and in which order. And in green, I've highlighted the moments when the castle's history has changed, has turned for some reason. I'm not going to go through all these key facts now. That's for you to go away and carry on revising. Most of you will know that history because you've talked about it a lot in class. But I just want to reiterate, it's important you know the owners and you know the moments when things change in that castle's history. So when it was used for one thing, perhaps, maybe a prison, and it changed to being not in use at all. Or when it's changed from being a military castle used in wars to being used for tourist attractions. It's important you know those different moments when they happened in history. What I've also done on this slide is keywords for the topic. So all the keywords and key terms linked to this castle are on that screen. And again, most of you will know these, and I talked about them in class. So when you want to pause the video and make notes or come back to it later, everything is there. So, why was Beeston built? You should all know that Ranulph the Earl of Chester built Beeston Castle in 1220. His primary reason was to keep his own political power. Ranulph had been on the Crusades, religious wars, and when he came back, he was under pressure to keep his lands and to keep his titles. At the time, the king was looking to take away people's lands. Ranulph wanted to prove his importance, so he started to build a castle at Beeston. One of the exam questions could easily be, why was this castle first built? Well, for that question, not only do you need to talk about Ranulph, you want to think about, well, why was it built at that place? Why was it built at Beeston in Chester? So on the screen, and again, I'm not going to go through all of these things. You can go through these when you revise. But I've given you a chart that sort of shows the different reasons why Beeston was built where it was. The surroundings column and the statements linked to surroundings show that Beeston was a good site to build a castle. A castle's initial purpose is to protect, to defend. Well, building the castle on top of a 500-foot hill with a rocky crag around it is a good form of defence. Being able to see 30 miles in all directions across Chester is excellent to see any possible attack. The site was a very good location to build a strong defendable castle. But, like I've just alluded to, it wasn't just built because it was built there, it was built because someone needed it. Ranulph, who initially built it, who died before the castle was built, wanted the castle to be completed. It was eventually completed by Henry and Edward, who spent finally money on it to complete the castle in 1303. Because they wanted a castle in Chester, another base for the royal family. So if you revise the statements on the left and you look at where I've highlighted on the right, the difference between building a castle at the site and needing to build a castle, you've got facts and evidence to explain why the castle was first built. And when it was first built, it looked very similar to that drawing. And some of these key words and key terms be familiar. This castle was not like normal castles at the time. If you think back to year 7, perhaps, when you did the Norman Conquest, and you might have drawn Motte and Bailey castles in your books, or you might have made one in class. I'll talk about Motte and Bailey castles a little bit more later on. That was the style of castle that most people were building in England after the Normans conquered England in 1066 at the Battle of Hastings. King William the Conqueror built Motte and Bailey castles, and they were castles that were built on a hill with a keep on top. At the bottom was the bailey, where there were wooden huts where food and supplies would be made and kept, and there might be some sort of moat around the castle to keep people out. This castle that Ranulph built was different. It had some similar features, like an inner and outer ward. You can see that labelled on the diagram. But unlike Motte and Bailey castles, there was no main keep where people could live. There was no main keep in the centre. The inner ward, you can see, has some small huts. The main part of this castle is the gatehouse, the big tower in the centre of the image. But that tower was more a defensive structure. It couldn't fit or cope with many people in it, and it certainly wasn't a residential building. You couldn't be held for banquets or feasts or anything like that. It was a more practical tower and access in and out of the two wards. This style of castle Ranulph had built based on his experiences around on the Crusades fighting. He'd seen other castles across the Middle East, and he'd seen other designs, and his design was quite unusual for the time. That makes it different to other castles in England. But that's the original site and what it looked like. You can see the rocky crag at the back, 500 feet high. That helps this defensive structure. All the towers on the outer curtain walls are almost shaped like the letter D, semicircular. Good for looking out and having a vantage point to see all around. And to get from one part of the castle, the inner ward, to the outer ward, there was a bridge, a wooden bridge built between the two parts of the castle and over the rocky ditch. Again, you should be familiar with most of these drawings and these key terms. So that's the original site. Well, the site has changed over time, and a key phrase that you could use in an answer if the question lends itself is turning points. When do things change? For good or for bad, for better, for worse, when do things change in this site's history? So on the screen now, in the castle's history, I've taken a timeline from an earlier slide. The red points are when the castle history changes for negative reasons. The green, suggesting that it's being used in a positive way. So I'll just briefly go through them and I'll explain what I mean. When the castle was initially built, it was a defensive structure. But by the 13 and 1400s, it wasn't being used for its original purpose. It wasn't being used for what Ranulph intended. It was being used as a prison in the war versus Wales. And by the 1400s, there were only a few servants and porters working in the castle. It was barely in use. So considering what it was built for, early on, the castle was not being used for that. And by the 1500s, it was in decline, slowly declining and going to ruins. There were no porters, no one working there, no one using it. It was just being left. A positive turning point becomes in 1602, when Hugh Beeston buys the land and the estate, including Beeston Castle and the Peckford estate. and changed the name. And this is where we get the name Beeston Castle from. That's a big turning point because that's now what the castle is known as. But the site itself doesn't get used any differently at that point. However, in 1642, the English Civil War breaks out, and the castle is used by the Royalist army fighting for King Charles, and that's a key moment in the castle's history. It's in peak success at that point. It's been used for a military battle in a national war, and it's still one of the most famous and important wars in our English history. And Beeston Castle was a part of that. It's a huge moment. So when you're doing your revision, using your timeline, make sure you are revising about the Civil War and what the castle was used for. There's notes on the previous slide, and there's notes on the workbook that's on class charts that you've used in class. You really need to know what happened during the English Civil War. After that war, though, the castle was slighted, which meant the castle was broken down and made indefensible. It couldn't be used again. And so in the 1700s, at the start of the Industrial Revolution, the castle again is in decline. It's not being used for anything. That changes in 1840 when John Tolmarsh buys it. He wants to make the castle become a tourist attraction. He wants to improve the view. He creates a festival in 1844, the Beeston Festival, to bring visitors to the castle. And he starts to regenerate it by planting trees around it to make it look nicer. That's a turning point, not only because it's something successful for the castle, but it's a clear turning point because the purpose of the castle changes. Previously, it's only ever been used for military reasons or it's been in decline. Now it's being used for something completely different. Visitors, tourism. And that's what it's still being used for today, a historical visitors site. It's now owned by the English Heritage, and recently they spent £1.9 million on it. Their job is to maintain the site, maintain its history, and attract visitors. And every year, the Beeston Fete is held in August to attract visitors to come and see the castle. So that's just a little overview of those key moments. So if your question lends itself to turning points or change, then you should be considering maybe some of those key points. Quite quickly here as an example, it's about the castle's history, when it was started to be built by Ranulph, up to when it's been used as a tourist attraction. So in an example, in a question, you could be using some of the facts that are on the left. And when you're explaining, you're using the red words that are next to it. It's those type of words, and again, I'll mention this a little bit more later on when we come to exam questions, but it's those type of words that help a good explanation. It's what the examiner wants to see. And not only know your facts and you're describing the history, you're explaining what type of change, what type of turning point, what type of effect it's had on the castle. Positive, negative, good, bad, significant or important. And those buzzwords about peak success and regeneration and decline, they're the type of language the examiner wants for really high marks. Another question could be about the people and the lives of people who have used Beeston or been connected to Beeston over time. Just have a quick little think of all the things that Beeston has been used for and the people who could have been throughout history. The site's been owned by royal family, Henry and Edward initially. Then it was used by the royal family during the Civil War. Throughout this time, servants, guards, porters, people working around the castle would always be using it. We know it was used as a prison in the war versus Wales. Soldiers would have been in and out of that castle over time. But we know more recently it's been used for visitors, for tourists. People have owned it, like John Tolmarsh, Hugh Beeston. They had different reasons for owning the site. Initially, the site before Ranulph even built Beeston tradesmen and merchants in Chester, trading in salt, based themselves at the foot of the castle by the rocky crag. As protection, the site's been used since Roman times in the Stone Age and the Iron Age. And as I'll mention a bit later on, artists have used the site as inspiration for paintings. So the question comes about who's been connected to the site, who's been impacted by the site, whose lives have been changed by the site. All of these people, these types of people, have been connected in some point or other. And in an exam answer, you'd want to talk about each of them people and what was happening to them at the time, what was going on during their life in the history of that castle. So, thinking about change over time, I just want to draw your attention to some of the differences to the castle then and now. So you can see on the left the original drawing of Beeston of 1303, and on the right a modern day photograph. You can see how the castle has changed over time. Physically, the castle now is not complete. You can see there are broken walls around the curtain wall towards the back of the castle. You can see some of the towers have been demolished and have been broken down. You can see on the right hand side there are more trees, the bottom right hand corner, planted by John Tolmarsh than there were originally. And you can see that on the left, original huts where food supplies were kept and stored and cooked. There's none of that now on the site on present day. There's been a lot of change. In the 1700s, after the Civil War, again you've got an artist's drawing on the left. Again, you can see the planting of the trees still hadn't happened. You can see where the castle had been slighted after the Civil War. You can see how it's sort of damaged at the top. But you can still see that actually in the 1700s, some of those towers in the curtain wall still existed. Those D-shaped towers that I mentioned earlier. In the 1840s, after John Tolmarsh bought the castle and started to attract visitors, you can start to see the ivy and the foliage that's growing over the gatehouse, trying to make it more attractive. That's now since been removed on the modern day photograph. That ivy actually was doing damage to the castle. The roots of that foliage was getting into the stonework of the castle and weakening the castle. It had to all be removed. In the 1950s, you can see something else that's quite important. Some of the D-shaped towers of the castle are still visible. But at the base of the hill that Beeston is on, you can see a new set of towers, a bit like the original gatehouse at the top of the hill. That's now the ticket office. That ticket office is still there today, but it's been modernised. But that ticket office is now at the base of Beeston and was built there after it became a tourist attraction. Built in the style, the same sort of shape, like an old-fashioned castle gatehouse. But now, since then, it's been modernised, glass windows, electricity inside, all because now we've got more visitors in modern day. There you can see the original gatehouse, still the original brickwork now, but the bridge that connects the gatehouse to the outer ward, that's now new. That's a modern bridge, modern materials. That's not the original one. That's been replaced. So it's safer for guests and visitors to go across. But you can still see some of the original features of the old castle. And that's the next sort of thing I want to focus on, the physical remains. A question could be about the physical remains of your site and what that can tell you about the past. Is it easy or hard to learn about this site based on the physical remains? Well, Beeston helps with us for lots of reasons. As I've just showed you, you can still see the original gatehouse to the inner ward, the main part of this castle. Remember what I said earlier on, that's not a big gatehouse. There wouldn't have been room for kitchens or banqueting halls or rooms for bedrooms. It is more a functional to defend and keep people out and keep people safe. But you can still see the original stone gatehouse. Crucially, a really big feature of this castle is the well. That's the original well. There was a second one further back on the other side, but that well is in really good condition. It's clear evidence of what was used at the time to supply clean water for people in the castle, to cook with, to clean with, to wash with. That clearly shows people that lived there at the time. People stayed there and needed supplies of fresh, clean water. That's a modern day image close up of that well. We're highlighted there, we've got those sort of stone flooring. That's where original huts and buildings would have been in a ward, which are no longer there. But the fact that that sort of area is stone gives an indication that something might have been there in the past. But that makes it hard to tell exactly what it was. We suspect it was those huts where people would have cooked or stored stuff, but we're not sure. There's a difficulty. The physical remains don't help us there too clearly. But in terms of other physical remains, we can still see here clearly the rocky ditch that goes around the front of the castle, and we can still see some of the outer walls, the curtain walls. Even though we know they were slighted after the Civil War, there's still evidence of what those walls were once used for. So a lot of this castle's history, physical history, is still there, although it's not very easy to tell everything about what it was used for in the past. If you get a question about physical remains, think about some of the original features that are still there, as well as some of the things that have changed. Like the gates, like the wall has been slighted, the bridge has been replaced. That makes it harder for historians to work out what the site was used for in the past. So following on from that, I've just got some key facts to support that type of question about the challenges historians face. There's a lot of things that make the site easy or easier to understand, because we know that some of the original stonework is still there. You look in green, inner wards, outer wards still have wells. The fact that it's taken over by a heritage site, the English heritage site, whose job and responsibility is to keep the castle in as best condition as possible so people can learn from it, that's a good thing. And it still holds the traditional festival every year. The site, part of the English heritage, so there are books, there are tour guides, there are people teaching you about Beeston Castle when you visit. They're trying to very much help you understand the history of the castle. And there's lots of artwork and paintings on display in the castle and in museums and galleries showing you what the castle was like. So we have lots of evidence, physical and other, to show us what the castle was like in the past. But there are some challenges. As I mentioned, the bridge is not the original bridge. The site has been covered with trees and bushes in the last 100 years. That's done damage to the site, to the walls, to the stonework. And that's not what Ranulph the Earl of Chester originally planned. That's covered up a lot of the castle's site and coverage. And that gatehouse, as I said, is not the original. It's modern, modernized. It's got modern materials like glass windows, electricity. That wasn't originally there. So when we talk about physical remains and how easy or hard it is for historians to learn about this place in the past, you've got some ideas to talk about. Interpretations. Another type of question could be, what are people's view of this site been in the past? How have people interpreted Beeston Castle? What have they thought about it? What was their opinion about it? I've got the little sort of optical illusion on the screen. Some of you might see a duck, some of you might see a rabbit. What I'm trying to make you remember, when it comes to interpretations, people are talking about the same person, place, part of history, but they have different views on it. They see different things. So people are all talking about Beeston Castle, but they may have different interpretations on it. Some may have positive interpretations, some may have negatives. I'm just going to run through with you some of the most famous and easy to remember, I hope, examples of different interpretations of this place. There's a famous interpretation from a local historian about this site's history, and a story about treasure and hidden gold. I won't read it all through, you can read it for yourself, but in a nutshell, it was said that King Richard once stored £100,000 worth of gold and other precious objects in Beeston Castle, hidden down one of the wells. The well is 360 foot deep, and he put it there for safekeeping when he visited, and we know he was in Chester around this time. That interpretation of Beeston Castle around the 1400s is a real positive impression of the castle's history. It makes the castle seem special, that a king could possibly leave gold there. It's encouraged people to hunt for that treasure ever since. It means that site locally has got some local importance, local significance. And it's just a famous story about this castle in Chester. And people have interpreted this story to mean that this castle must have been important in the past. And if you remember, at this time, 1400s, the castle had been used as a prison in the war versus Wales, but then there were only servants and porters there towards the end. It wasn't much in use. So when the castle wasn't much in use by the 1400s, to give it this sort of special story linked to a royal family member and hidden treasure, that really boosts the significance locally of this site. I've mentioned before that a huge moment in this castle's history was the English Civil War. After the English Civil War, in a local church, they turned their stained glass windows into a commemorative design to commemorate what part Beeston played in the Civil War. Some of the stained glass windows include objects linked to that battle used by the Royalists, like weapons and armour. And that shows that the people in the area, people of Chester, near Beeston, thought that Beeston had been special, had been used in the Civil War in a positive way. They were proud of Beeston Castle, and he wants to show their pride by commemorating it in stained glass windows. So again, the red question is just a little prompt. What was that site used for at the time? Go away and revise and make sure you know the key facts about the Civil War and how Beeston was linked to it. But it shows the interpretation here is a really positive one. People remembered this castle fondly, important to local and national history because it was a national war it was involved in. The Royalist army were based there, and this just shows how they remember it. There was another interpretation. This was a sort of prophecy that predicted that one day Beeston Castle would save England. It would rise up and play an important role in saving the country. This came from the 1500s, before the Civil War. People before the Civil War thought Beeston Castle, when it wasn't in use, when it was in decline in the 1500s, when it was completely unused, felt that this castle would one day rise up and save England. And then 1642, the English Civil War starts. It is used in a national war. This prophecy almost came true. People remembered at different points in history that this castle was significant. They felt it was important. This little prophecy shows and underlines that. On the screen now are two coins, two bronze half pennies. Those coins were used to pay industrial factory workers in the 1800s. And on the left coin, you can see clearly the name Beeston Castle, and you can see a picture of the castle. At this time, the castle was not in use. It had been slighted after the Civil War, but yet people locally felt the castle was so important, they wanted to put it onto a coin. Again, that shows people locally thought the castle was special. It had some sort of local importance, and he wanted people to know about it, and he placed it on a coin to commemorate it. They've interpreted the castle positively, its history positively, and rewarded the castle by placing it on a coin. And even though the coin is not worth a great deal of money, half pennies were common around this time. Common coin to have because many people were poor, working in industrial conditions, for low wages, for low pay. This would have been widely distributed, this type of coin. And again, it makes Beeston look historically in a positive light. And finally, another very, very good example of how the castle's been interpreted is through painting and art. There are different painters who've painted Beeston Castle, particularly during the 17 and 1800s, during the Industrial Revolution. This one is by an artist called Joseph Turner. You keep one example in your head, keep Turner's work in your head. They painted Beeston Castle because they thought it was picturesque. This half-broken castle that had been slighted in a previous war, sitting on top of a high hill, 500 foot above ground level. They saw it and they thought it picturesque and beautiful and painted it, often on bright blue sunny afternoons. In this example, you can just see in the distance up to the right, the tower of the gatehouse just sort of peeking through the clouds. And the reason they thought it was such a beautiful sight and it was so commonly painted in the area was because when you turned around and looked towards towns like Leeds and Manchester, you're seeing smoke, smog, pollution from factories. The scenery was completely different. And these artists were called romanticists. They romanticized. They fell in love with how England used to be. Because prior to the Industrial Revolution, many people had lived in the countryside where the air was cleaner. The countryside was picturesque. Life was simpler. And now, in an industrial age, life seemed to be getting dirtier, harder, more unhealthy. So artists were fondly painting places like Beeston to remember sort of the good old days. They've interpreted Beeston positively. They remember it fondly. And there's lots of famous artwork linked to Beeston Castle on display. But now Beeston is a tourist attraction, and it's used to attract visitors to teach them about the site and its history. And every August bank holiday, you've got the Beeston Festival, where guides, tour guides, historians dress up, recreate battles, jousting, living conditions, pastimes, all to make people understand what it was once like. And it's a family day out. And it's very, very popular. Okay. One of the other key questions could be, can we compare our site, Beeston, to anything else? Well, the best example we're going to use is a local castle to Beeston, which is Chester Castle. Chester Castle is a much bigger castle than Beeston. It's not too far away, but it's more significant locally and nationally than Beeston has always been. Now on the screen is an example of a Motte and Bailey castle I mentioned earlier. They were the types of castles that the Normans built after 1066. And they're the ones you might remember from year 7. where you have a motte, like a hill, a mound of earth, a wooden keep on top where people would eat, sleep, and soldiers would guard. And then you have a bailey at the bottom with huts for servants and supplies. Chester Castle was built similar design to this, so it's very different to Beeston. This reconstruction of Chester Castle, you can see on the left hand side those longer, bigger huts and grand halls in the sort of outer ward space of the castle. The inner ward is near the top, up on the hill, again with larger buildings, more space inside compared to Beeston. And the two designs, again here, to show you how different the castles were in many ways. You've got original 1303 design of Ranulph, the Earl of Chester, finished off by Henry and Edward. And you've got Chester Castle, similar period. Both have got inner and outer wards. Both have got towers. But in the shaded area in light grey, you can see they've got a great wall, chambers for sleeping. You've got more accommodation and living space. Royal family members stayed at Chester Castle. It was larger, it was more prominent, it was more important. So when we're comparing these two castles, we've got to look for similarities and differences. So again, in your workbook, which is on class charts, or you should have a copy at home, there was some details and descriptions about Chester Castle for you to go away and reread. But what I've done in the summary is highlight some similarities between the two. So again, I'm not going to go through all these now, but you've got some key points. Some only apply to Beeston, some apply to Chester, some apply to both. So make sure you're reading from the workbook that's with you in home or is on the class chart, as I said. Read the description of Chester, because if you get a question where you compare these two places, two castles, it's quite a good question to have, because there's lots of things you can write about. Okay, coming towards the end now, we're starting about exam questions. So a lot of what I've already showed you is content, key facts, key descriptions. To get the highest marks, as I said earlier on, you need to explain. And in your explanations, when you're using connectives, there are some buzzwords and phrases that the examiner will really want you to use and expand on to write a good explanation to show this castle and its history. So some of these words I've used before, but they explain how the castle has developed over time. So I've used phrases like peak success and decline and not in use, regeneration, when money's been spent on it to rebuild it or redesign it. But if you can also talk about the rate of change, the speed of change, slow decline, rapid change, talk about how quickly or slowly things happen, that's another developed explanation which an examiner would like. The purpose, thinking about how the castle has been used for different things, a military base, used as a tourist attraction, used as a prison, used for trade, not in use. All that purpose has changed over time. It's been significant and important locally to local people, but nationally in wars. It's been useful in many moments in history. So all those phrases, buzzwords, they're the type of things that examiners would like you to add into an explanation. You're not just writing all you know about Beeston. You're not just writing a story about the castle. You're linking it back to a question every time, explaining what the question wants you to explain. So to finish, I've got two last really important slides. The examiner can only ask you about a certain amount of things. And in yellow, on the left-hand side, are all the different sort of focuses that he can ask you, all the different types of questions linked to these focuses that he possibly ask you. So I'm going to give you, on the next two slides, all of those focus questions. He can't ask you anything different about this castle. That's all he wants to know. And what I've given you on the outline response section is a summary of what you should be writing about. So if you were to do some revision using these last two slides, I would suggest you look at the focus question, you look at my response, and then you would bullet point, mind map, make a list of key facts, key words, key buzzwords that you would include in an answer. All of these focus questions and summaries link back to one of my earlier slides at the very beginning about what do we do when we study historical sites. They're all linked to these things. And a lot of the facts that you know about Beeston Castle will answer all of these types of questions. So I really would advise you, when you're revising with Beeston, look at these last two slides in particular and think, right, what extra knowledge would I use to apply to that type of question? When I talk about dates, people, the reasons it was built, surroundings, the interpretations, how people have viewed it, the type of people who've lived or worked or used Beeston, what would I discuss? And just bullet point my map for each one. That's it. That's finished. Thank you for listening. If you've got any questions, you know you can email me or your history teacher, or see us in school when you're in for an exam. But hopefully you've got everything you need. I suggest you download the PowerPoint, go back through it in your own time. You make notes using your workbooks, and use, if you need to, the English Heritage website, which will give you all the facts that I've gone through, some extra information. Thanks, Year 11. Take care. Good luck.